Today on Mr. Media, I'll talk to Curt Smith, half of the enduring British pop duo Tears for Fears, and also half of the reason I'm still happily married more than 2 decades on. Stick around, this is going to be a good story.
Hey, did you know that you can listen to the latest Mr. Media on your phone with the Stitcher app? Stitcher is smart radio for your smartphone. Mr. Media is on demand and on the go with Stitcher. Download Stitcher for your phone today. Get the free download at Stitcher.com. That's STITCHER.com.
So much media, so little time. Who keeps track of it all? That would be me. This is Bob Andelman, and this is a Mr. Media interview. You know, MrMedia.com, MRMedia.com. Stop by and check it out. There are nearly 700 archived celebrity interviews for your listening pleasure. The show is brought to you today by thepartyauthority.us. Planning a wedding, mitzvah, or corporate event in the New York, New Jersey, or Pennsylvania area? For any and all occasions, call the Party Authority nationwide at 1-800-DIAL-DJs. That's 1-800-342-5357, where one call does it all. Mr. Media is recorded live before a studio audience of 1980s Brit pop bands who didn't possess a fraction of Tears for Fears' songwriting and performing chops. And I'm looking at you, flock of seagulls and Haircut 100, in the new media capital of the world, St. Petersburg, Florida. Well, here's a Tears for Fears story I guarantee you haven't heard before. I was the pop music critic for the St. Petersburg Times in 1985, assigned to review a Tears for Fears concert. I rushed back to the paper's Clearwater Bureau that night to file my story. Waiting for it in downtown St. Petersburg, the headquarters of the paper, was the late-night editor, Christine Holston. I filed my story and waited for her to read it and answer any questions she might have. But her major question wasn't about my story. It was about the photo credit. The photographer identified the picture as Roland Orzabal on the left, Curt Smith on the right. But Christine wasn't convinced. I said the photographer had it correct. I was there for 2 hours, I should know. But she had the final call and switched the ID in the caption. It was probably the last time I was right about anything in our relationship. But I was right. She was wrong. A horde of Tears for Fears fans called in the next day to say how stupid I was, however, for getting it wrong, of course. They weren't happy about being referred to as teeny boppers either, but that's another story. That was one of the first real moments that truly bound us, and to this day, whenever we hear a Tears song, we can't help but stop and fondly reminisce about that night. And we've now been married 22 years and counting. Okay, well, that's my long way of telling you that my guest today is Tears for Fears' Curt Smith, who has released a new holiday single, This Is Christmas, and will be playing several solo gigs in Los Angeles in 2011, and will then rejoin Roland Orzabal for a Tears for Fears tour of South America and the U.S. West Coast. Now, I'll be playing This Is Christmas later in the show, but why wait? You can order it right now for just 99 cents on iTunes. And Curt Smith, welcome to Mr. Media.
Why, thank you very much. I'm happy that I was a part of you finding your wife.
It's a lot better than finding out you fathered a child somewhere in the world, isn't it?
Very true, yeah. That's one of the better tour stories. Although thankfully I've never had the other one either.
Well, that's good. I'm very glad to hear that, my friend.
Yes.
So I told you this story for a reason. I know it seems self-serving, and we'll get off that in just a minute, but I have to ask you, this is a 25-year-old argument between my wife and I. On Saturday, September 21st, 1985, at the USF Sundome in Tampa, will you affirm that you were on the left and Roland was on the right?
I mean, of course I'd have to see the picture, but my guess is you are correct.
There you go, honey.
Was I on the left? Actually, you know what? Back then I was, and here's sort of how I know that, because someone did mention during the last tour we did on the East Coast in the summer this year, that we've swapped places, and we were never really aware of that. But actually, when we did used to play back then, I was on the left, Roland on the right, and now it's the other way around.
I win another one. That's 2 in 25 years. Good for me. Thank you. Thank you very much, Curt.
Well, you know, I'm here to serve.
Well, now seriously, I am delighted that you and your partner survived the 80s and that your music is still in such demand 25 years later. Did you ever expect that you would have this kind of enduring career?
I don't think we ever really planned any of that kind of stuff. We are of the opinion that if we do good work, it will endure, so we spend our time trying to make the work we do the best we could possibly do at that moment. And then there's always room for improvement. Once you get to the stage where you think you're not going to get any better, my guess is that's when you give up. But I think we're still improving, and I think live we're so much better than we were 20 years ago, and thankfully we've honed our craft since then and become much better players and singers. And so as long as there's room for improvement and songs to be written, then we'll continue.
Why do you think, and maybe you've just said it because of the live performance, but I mean, why do you think that Tears for Fears endures when there's such a long list of bands from that period that came and went just so quickly?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is to do with the live playing and also the quality of records you make. We are either blessed or cursed with the fact that we never want to do the same record twice. So we always try and find a way to sort of move onwards or sideways or find some new way of doing something, and so that keeps it interesting for us. And then I think basically we're big fans of great songwriting. So if the songs aren't good, then they don't make it to any of our records. And then, as I mentioned, on top of that, we happen to be getting better live. So with all those things put together, it seems that we've had a longish career so far. We hope for it to continue. But there are other bands that may have been, studio-created bands that really couldn't, as they say in America, bring it live.
Yeah, I think there were more than a few of those,
I think that's the case, in any era, though. I was having this discussion the other day with a friend of mine in the car, and he was going on about, how great this one decade was. He was talking about the 80s at that point in time, and how, there's so many more good bands from that era than the 90s and I'm like, well, no, there's not. There are just a few, and you may think all the music you hear now is bad, but in 15, 20 years' time, the good parts of what's happening today will live on, and all the bad stuff we'll have forgotten about because no one will play it anymore. So I think it's music, to me personally, in my taste, I think maybe 10% of it is good and 90% of it is I could give. I don't really care about it that much. I find it a little trite, but that's my personal musical taste.
I tend to think that part of having that kind of long career is when a band strikes a chord with one song and then can come back and do it again. In your case, I think the most enduring music, correct me if I'm wrong, I may get this wrong, but I'm thinking that Everybody Wants to Rule the World is such an anthemic song, and it's been adopted by so many people for so many things.
It has, but then, if you go back even further, and it's strange in America, because we actually became big during the songs from the Big Cher album because of Everybody Wants to Rule the World and Shout and Head Over Heels. Yet we had an album before that was never really big in America. It did well in New York and Los Angeles because of the two prime radio stations there. But then what has happened since then, sort of 25 years later, Mad World, it just had a rebirth, and Gary Jules had a hit with it. Adam Lambert on American Idol is doing it, and it's interesting that which is one of my favorite songs, that a song like that has managed to have as long a life as it has.
Well, that's it. The one song leads to another, and people, if you hit that chord, I think, then people go out and they want to discover those other songs. And you guys obviously had the chops. You wrote good songs, you played, and Yeah,
I think the Adam Lambert thing was a little. It was eye-opening because I was actually at a LA Galaxy. I'm a big soccer fan, football fan. Game when someone texted me from the East Coast, because obviously American Idol is on 3 hours before there, saying, "Oh my God, Adam Lambert's doing Mad World," and then I thought, "Oh, that's kind of cool." The fact that he picked something as obscure as that for America. It was a big hit in Europe, but not here. And then it was only later that the bubble got burst somewhat when I was told the theme of the show
Oh.
which was songs released in the year you were born.
I'm sorry, but that is
Mad
funny.
World came out the year that Adam Lambert was born.
That is funny.
Which was pretty funny.
But it's interesting.
I guess, again, a testament to the song. We've managed to keep going for that long.
Well, but so you didn't know. I always wonder about this. You didn't know that he was going to perform the song. That was all done.
You get things through that you sort of sign off on. Yes, it's okay. You have to kind of give permission, but to be honest, most of the time I'm like, yeah, whatever. Because it's not that big a deal.
Right.
They don't pay you lots of money to use your song, and normally I would just say, sure, anyone can perform our songs. I don't mind.
So in the so I wanted to ask you about this. In the last year, then it was TV had a big impact on Tears for Fears, and I wanted to ask you, going back 25 years, this was shortly after the birth of MTV, which I think played a big part at the time for you guys, didn't it?
Yeah, without doubt. I mean, I think that. Although, having said that, I'm not convinced our videos were that sort of eye-opening and original or anything until we got to Seeds of Love album. I mean, I think they were pretty simple, which maybe there's a certain beauty in that simplicity, but when I look back at a lot of the videos that were made then, I think they were sort of so overly art for art's sake and really had no content, in the sense of the meaning behind the song. Ours tended to be sort of us performing live. I mean, with Everybody Wants to Rule the World, the feeling we had about the song when we first recorded it was, it feels like you'd be driving down some US freeway in a cool car and listening to this on the radio. And so we just used that for the video, and Shout was like a bunch of our families and friends in a studio. That was it. I mean, these were videos that were made for next to nothing.
But they worked.
No, they worked, definitely.
Yeah.
I mean, I think if you capture the emotion of a song, I mean, it's the same, weirdly enough, video is very similar to music, and you don't really need money to make them. I mean, people get caught up in that, I want the biggest director and I want this $2 million video, but yet there can be simple ones that work fantastically, and it's really about the emotion. And the same goes for recording. You can hire every top producer, but if you don't have the songs, or if you don't play well and sing well, then it's still not going to do anything. It's still not going to be good. Certainly nowadays you can make records for next to nothing, and they can be great. That's really down to you and how good you are.
Well, Curt, let's take a quick break. This is Bob Andelman, and you're listening to the Mr. Media radio interview with Curt Smith of the British rock group Tears for Fears, and we'll be right back.
Once upon a time there was an engineer. Choo-choo Charlie was his name, we hear. He had an engine and he sure had fun. He used good and plenty candy to make his train run.
Charlie says, love my good and plenty. Charlie says, really rings the bell. Charlie says, love my good and plenty. Don't know any other candy that I love so well.
Hi, I'm Julie Bowen, and I am a face of influenza. Health officials now recommend everyone 6 months of age and older get immunized against influenza this and every year.
We all are faces of influenza.
Vaccination is safe and is the best way to help protect yourself and your family. The American Lung Association urges everyone 6 months of age and older, and we mean everyone, to get vaccinated. Visit facesofinfluenza.org.
This is Bob Andelman, and you're listening to the Mr. Media radio interview with Curt Smith of the British rock group Tears for Fears. Curt, of course, you're not here today to talk about my marriage, of course, but thank you for doing that. But, of course, you have a new holiday single out, This is Christmas. Why do a Christmas song?
Well, to be honest, I sort of tried for a bunch of years. I mean, I love listening to sort of certain Christmas songs. I'm a big fan of sort of English, sort of 70s pop music Christmas songs. And a huge fan of, Lennon and McCartney, who have both done fantastic Christmas songs. And I always felt like I sort of wanted to do one, but every time I tried, it always seemed a little trite to me and forced, and I didn't know what sort of spirit I was trying to capture particularly, and what Christmas meant to me. And then I actually did an appearance on a TV show called Psych earlier this year. It aired in September. The difficult acting job of playing myself, and after that, James Roday, who is the lead actor in Psych, called me and said, "Look, we have this Christmas episode of the TV show, and I'd love you to write a Christmas song." And I thought, well, okay, then maybe this is some inspiration. So I said, well, send me the scene that it's going to be in. And he sent me the scene, and the whole premise of the show is sort of, the premise of this scene is his relationship with his father, and how he has this sort of love-hate thing with his father all the time, and, it's family, basically. And so suddenly I got the inspiration that, that sort of does sum up Christmas for me. It's all about, having to go home because you're expected to go home, and then getting in fights with your parents or siblings or whatever. It's always stressful. Christmas is always stressful if you're all made to be in one place at the same time, at least in my experience.
Now, I'm going to play the song in just a second. I want you to make clear, because I had to listen several times. I think I finally got it. The opening line is what?
Is a breakout. What's the first line?
Is it? It's bring on the guilt.
No, it's not bring out. It's like break out the guilt.
Break out the guilt. Okay.
Yeah, it was because it was initially break out the gifts, which is what I wrote, and I thought, no, that doesn't sum up Christmas for me. Guilt, the whole guilt thing when you go home is what you get from your parents normally. Why don't you get a real job? What's happening? All those kind of things. So it's actually break out the guilt. It is the season. Tis the season, but tis the season.
Well,
I spend a lot of time over lyric writing.
Yeah, I got to say, over the years have heard an awful lot of Christmas music. I remember one year as a pop critic, I think I got like 25 different albums that year, different artists, new Christmas stuff. I don't think anyone has ever opened with the line that included the word guilt. So
it's break out the guilt.
Yeah.
Yeah, and what I liked about guilt also was, because I'm also conscious of now I've lived in America for 22 years, and all that time in New York and Los Angeles. So let's say it's New York and Los Angeles. So Christmas is not quite as celebrated as Hanukkah is. So the guilt thing was also a little play on guilt, which is a Hanukkah thing. So.
Yeah, I'm so glad you said that. I was just going to say that I guess I'm a bit of an idiot, but part of the reason I had to keep listening to it was I thought it was guilt.
And that's intentional. That was intentional.
Very good. Nice job. So, Curt, the song reminded me a little of Do They Know It's Christmas that Band-Aid recorded. And I guess in reading a little about it, part of that may be because I got the sense of so many people in the studio. You had a lot of family and friends participate in this, right?
Yeah, there was... I wanted it to be a big chorus, so I knew I was going to get a lot of people to sing it. But what's interesting and why I like doing different things like this is, as I mentioned before, I got sent the scene. And so I'm actually writing two visuals on a screen. I actually see the scene and where the vocals go and all the rest of it. And it's about him coming to terms with his father and going home, and James is opening a Christmas card. Sean is his character, opening a Christmas card, and then it zooms in on his father. And the whole feeling to me was him feeling like a child again. Because that's what happens when you go home to your parents' house. You end up, no matter how old you are, if you go back to your parents, they want to make you feel like a kid. So it zoomed into the father asleep on the sofa, and I wanted it to seem like James was being a child at that point in time. And so then I got Charlton Pettis, who I work with, his son and his daughter, and then my two daughters to sing that bit with just children's voices. And then I actually had about 20 people that happened to be at Charlton's house come in the studio and sing it, and I went to my kids' school and recorded the entire 6th grade music class singing it. So it gets very big and at the end of it.
Now, we're just about to wrap up, but I got to ask, after all these years, so many records, Tears for Fears records, and then some solo albums, how do you and Roland decide kind of what to record and release together these days and what to record apart?
We sort of know. We always instinctively know, I think. What happens is there are songs that are... Tears for Fears is basically where myself and Roland meet. It's about compromise. And that's not a bad thing. That's all good. Those are the things we can agree on. And so the basis of Tears for Fears music is these are the songs we can agree on. I know when I write a certain song that Roland's it's not going to be his cup of tea. So I'd end up doing it myself. And also I think there are a lot of songs that we both do as solo artists that are very, very personal to us that we don't want watered down and made into Tears for Fears songs because they would change. And because they're so personal, you don't want to change them. You want to keep them exactly the way they're written. So I think that our solo work is incredibly personal and lyrically very personal, and then the work we do together is more general. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. It does. And, I want to wind up kind of the way we started. We started off talking about my marriage, but I want to finish by asking you about your musical marriage. How do you keep this partnership, which is sort of like a marriage between, two people?
Oh, it's very much like a marriage, trust me. Actually, well, less like a marriage than having a brother.
Okay.
Yeah.
How do you keep it fresh, and how do you keep, out of each other's hair?
We live 6,000 miles from each other.
I gotta try that.
I was that earlier, and I'm like, 6,000 miles thing works for us. We see each other a few times a year to work, and then in between, Roland's in England, I'm in Los Angeles, so we don't see each other. So the time we spend together is kind of valued a bit more, and it tends to be around work, but, it's nice to hang out, and outside of that, we're very much family men, and we're with our families in our respective homes. We have completely different sets of friends, obviously Roland being in England, me being here. So I think, weirdly enough, distance. I mean, if you put it this way, I do sort of, I can make an analogy with me and my wife. We've been together 22 years also, by the way. And there was a time where she had to work out of home, and it just wasn't good. Because I worked out of home and she worked out of home. We were in too close to each other all the time. But then, now she's back in an office, and so we work, separately, and we see each other in the evenings, obviously, and at the weekends and everything else. That is a good way of keeping a marriage together, not spending every hour together. And with myself and Roland, it's sort of similar, as you say, a bit like a marriage. When we were... The reason I left back in 1990 for a while was, we spent every hour of every day pretty much together because of how successful we were and because of work. And it got too stressful. I don't think people are meant to be together for that many hours per day.
Well, if my wife decides to start working at home like I do, I'm going to work on that 6,000 miles apart thing. I like that.
No, I mean, it's just, there's got to be a certain separation because then you appreciate it when they come back.
Right. I understand. Well, folks, listen, you can download Curt Smith's new single, This Is Christmas, on iTunes, or you can order it right now at a great price at MrMedia.com. You can also order the entire Tears for Fears catalog on MrMedia.com. And to find out what Curt Smith is up to these days, you can check out his website, his official website, which coincidentally is called Curt Smith, and it's Curt with a C, CurtSmithOfficial.com. Curt, thank you so much for joining us on Mr. Media today.
It's been my pleasure. It was fun, and good to hear that you and your wife are still together after all this time.
And still Tears for Fears fans.
Yes. And also, if I may mention, I don't know...
Yeah.
Next, on the 15th of December, is actually the Psych episode where This Is Christmas is actually on the show.
Oh, very good.
So that is the Christmas episode of Psych on USA Network, which is on December 15th.
Well, and Dule Hill, James Roday's partner on the show, was a guest on this show a while back, and unfortunately we were scheduled to have James on a couple weeks ago, and it didn't work out. So, I'm glad you got to mention it. It's a great show.
He's a busy man. He was busy singing with me, probably. I did a solo show a couple of weeks ago, and he came and sang with me.
So it's your fault. All right. Well, we'll let you off the hook since, yeah. Well, and
we love Dule as well.
Thank you. And folks, for more original interviews with your favorite musicians, surf over to our main website, mrmedia.com, mrmedia.com. Subscribe to Mr. Media on iTunes, and you'll never miss a show. Just search Mr. Media Interviews from within iTunes and subscribe for free. You can also listen with a piece of string and a tin can in many locations. If you've got an idea for a guest, a comment on today's show, or would like to advertise on Mr. Media Radio, email me directly at bob@mrmedia.com. You can also follow me on Facebook or on Twitter, twitter.com/Andelman, or on Facebook, just search Mr. Media Interviews. Thanks so much for joining us today. Really appreciate you sharing a piece of your day with Mr. Media. Thanks for listening.
This is Rhonda Shear, and I'd rather be up all night with Gilbert Gottfried than Mr. Media.
Turn your back on the deceiver.